Super glad to see you. If you don't know me, my name is James Mankle. Super glad to be here today. Usually I am behind these microphones leading us in worship, but today I get to give us a wonderful message. I have some students in the room. I have some kids in the room. I also have some people who work in education, and I want you to do a little participation for me. Okay, there you go. Good morning, class. No. You guys have no excuse to clap during worship now, because I just figured out you just outed yourself that you could clap on beat. But good morning, class. Now you gotta say good morning, Mr. Mant. Yeah, there you go. That is my teacher voice. That is what I do for the students that I work with. I get to work with show choirs in middle school and high school and college, and so that is my teacher voice. And I probably just brought all of you back to not a fun time in our lives. School. Not fun. There's a lot of things as an adult, kids, listen to this, is that there's a lot of things adults that you don't have to worry about when you become an adult. Standardized testing. Great. Scantrons, especially erasing a scantron. Who do kids who still do scantrons? They don't have character. They're not building enough character. No, but scantrons, you would literally try to be like, okay, I have to erase this really delicately, or it's just gonna smudge. You don't have to worry about anymore. The fitness gram pacer test, which is now illegal because it's like, yeah, but we all know it. Yeah, no. I can't tell you what a 401k is, but I can tell you the power, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. You don't have to worry about that anymore. School lunch, don't have to worry about that anymore. How do education expect me to function at my top of my game when they're feeding me like a cardboard piece at 10:30? Like, don't even get me started about school lunch milk, because do you guys have bottles now? Do kids have, is it cartons? Yeah, the cartons are a pain because you open it and then it will like not open and tear, and then you open the back side of the carton and now you just have this big old box trying to drink it, and you gotta pinch it, you gotta tip it back. Who knows that problem? Yeah. Don't have to worry about that as an adult. I just get to drink straight from the jug, Oh, I was just talking about this with Mari and Missy last week. There are some schools that have bagged milk. It's just like a pouch. It's not even like Capri Sun. It's like a pouch, and you literally stab it, and it's like a tracheotomy, just like on your milk. like students got to do that without ends. I've seen videos of it exploding. Like, I don't have to worry about that as an adult. And so there's so many things from school that we don't have to worry about and think about anymore, which is so good. Who here is grateful for not having to be in school anymore? That is awesome. But I think the one thing, But I think the one thing that actually I probably miss the most is actually the teachers. I know that we have this caricature of teachers in our head. It's like the old witchy looking, like hunched over like teacher, and she has the giant yardstick and she's like slapping your hand. We have that like caricature of teachers, but that's not real teachers. That's not real education. You would be fired. Trina would fire them. But raise your hands if you had at least like one teacher in the back of your head, one that you can remember, the one that made an impact on your life and your future. We have that one teacher. Now, growing up for me, Balin, you should listen to this. I knew I was a smart kid, probably too smart for my own good. I'd see assignments and problems more like puzzles and games where I try to get to the finish line, maybe the fastest or in the most clever way. I would take shortcuts. I would cut corners. Basically, hashtag cheat codes. I would do cheat codes in school. So as a student, I wasn't necessarily that one kid that they would punish by putting him in the corner, making him wear the pointy dunce hat and being like, but I think teachers, I would hear this more than once in parent-teacher conference, teachers going, I love James. James is a great kid, but he likes to take his own path. Or James is a great student. He gets his work done, but he doesn't like following instructions. That was me. In other words, like Doc Ock to Spider-Man, brilliant but lazy. But I think for me, school changed when I was introduced to fine arts, theater, band, choir, dance, those things. I discovered that these subjects not only fueled me creatively, but I learned that I couldn't cut corners anymore. You have to practice. When the sheet music says three blind mice, I can't just go three blind mice. I have to do it. I have to remember it. I have to practice it. And that made me a better student when it came to other subjects. There you go. Can't talk today. But not only did I discover subjects, but I discovered teachers who not only made me a better student, but made me a better human being. So shout out to teachers like Miss Lyons. I had Mr. Richling, Mr. V, Mrs. Schneider, Goo, DeAndre Clayton. There's so many teachers I could list on top of my hands that not only cared about the materials they were teaching, but cared about my well-being, cared about students' well-being. They not only taught the material, but they taught things like, and they embodied this, they described, they showed how to care for one another, teamwork, generosity, kindness, humility, responsibility, character, maturity, failure, faith, and ultimately how to express our own thoughts and not just how to think them. And for me now, as an educator, as someone who gets to be in these classrooms, gets to work with these kids and these students, not only just in the city, but in Council Bluffs and Iowa and beyond, places like Oklahoma and Minnesota, I get this amazing opportunity to impact students, the next generation. And I want to be remembered like my teachers, not just someone who taught information, but someone who invested in transformation. And right now we're in a series, we're talking about the person who was and is Jesus and our misconceptions of him. And so far we've learned that the real Jesus, that Jesus is and was a king like no other. Jesus was and is our Savior. Jesus, last week, Pastor Aeric just talked about Jesus as a miracle worker. And now Jesus was and is known by this specific name, Rabbi. And not rabid or rabbit, but Rabbi. And it's important for us to talk about that idea today, because if we only see Jesus as the one who saves us, I think we might miss the reality that he's also the one who forms us. And the word rabbi, it appears throughout all of the Gospels, but it meant so much more than just a teacher. We all know what a teacher looks like, but ultimately it was master. And these rabbis or these masters, they would have disciples, or in our day, we like to call them apprentices, but disciples. So think rabbi, disciple, teacher, student, Batman, Robin, Mr. Miyagi, Danielson, Obi-Wan, Luke, Usher, Bieber. And in the first century, discipleship under a rabbi, it just wasn't casual. A disciple didn't just go to I'm going to a lecture at Metro, or I'm listening to a weekly podcast. They structured their entire existence to their rabbi. This is what John Mark Comer in his book, Practicing the Way, defines as apprenticeship. And it's these 3 steps. Be with your rabbi, become like your rabbi, and do as they did. Be with your rabbi, become like your rabbi. Following a rabbi in Jesus' time was so culturally serious that there's even an ancient Jewish blessing. It was like this: may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. If you don't know what that means it was an encouragement to disciples to follow their teacher so closely, physically and metaphorically, that they were covered in the dust kicked up from the rabbi's feet. So you're hearing all this, and you're going, I knew Jesus was a teacher, James. Why is all of this, information important? And duh, yes. Jesus taught. Jesus was, known as a rabbi. Yet, he wasn't just any rabbi. And he was so radically different as a rabbi. And to understand Jesus as a rabbi, and I'm saying a lot fully, you're going to hear that a lot today, we must compare him with the rabbis of his day and to see what made him unique among the rest. In the time of Jesus, rabbis derived their authority by quoting other teachers, other rabbi. Lore and tradition, it was just on and on and on. They would say, Rabbi so-and-so said. That's how rabbis taught. But Jesus was different. So you see, authority for a typical rabbi was borrowed, but not inherent. But Jesus broke that pattern. And throughout all of Matthew 5:20-48, we're going to be in Matthew 5 for a little bit. He's teaching about the law. And what the law meant was the Torah, was the old teachings, was Moses, was the commandments. That was the law. And Jesus actually sandwiches in verse 5:20-48, he sandwiches the law between these two sayings. He goes, "You have heard it said," and this is really important, "but I say to you." You have heard it said, but I say to you. And so what that means is he spoke as the source of truth. He wasn't just a commenter on it. He wasn't just interpreting the truth. He is the truth. That's where we get the phrase, the way, the truth, the life. I believe that you are the way. Okay. Sorry, worship brain coming back in. But this is why people in his time were astonished, because Jesus taught as the one who had authority. And even to that point, Jesus makes a shocking claim a couple verses back in Matthew 5:17-20. He says this, "Don't misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose." And a couple verses later in verse 20, he says, "But I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Let's wrap it back. Let's go back. Let's think back. Think critically. Go back. So Jesus did not come to abolish, we're going to just call the law the rules. We're just going to say the rules. He did not come to abolish these rules, but he came to accomplish it, or in other translations it says fulfill it, but to accomplish what the law was. And then doubles down and tells us, you and I, that we need to be better than the Pharisees, which I'll get to in a little bit. Now, if you look to that verse on the surface, what Jesus is saying here sounds to me, A, really complicated, B, really heavy, and C, sorry, Jesus, that's really impossible for me to do. But what Jesus is actually saying here is not only did he perfectly obey the law, but he's revealing its true intent. And what it ultimately pointed towards is this, that Jesus calls us to internal transformation, not just exterior obedience. Jesus calls us to internal transformation, not just exterior obedience. You see, if you don't know this, the Pharisees, they were experts in the law. Kids today would call that ball knowledge. You got ball knowledge. You knew something that I didn't. But their flaw, see, so the teachers are rolling their eyes at me. The parents are rolling their eyes at me. Everyone's rolling their eyes at me. But the flaw that these rabbis had is that they added layers of human tradition. And the Pharisees, they emphasized outward obedience, but they burdened people with rules, and ultimately they missed the heart of God. And Jesus challenges us now, just as much as he challenged them back then, because we can't let rule following, or legalism is what it's called, to get in the way of having a relationship with and having our hearts transformed by Jesus. A lot of us live life like that right now, that there's some heavenly scoreboard that we need to live by and follow. Imagine if you had to live your life like that every single day. Ooh, did I pray? Yes, 10 points. I just messed up, minus 20 points. Did I read my Bible? 5 points. Did I lose my temper? Minus 50. 10 points to Gryffindor, But I think we constantly check and we ask ourselves, where do I stand with God? If I follow all the rules, am I good with God? And some days we feel close to God. Others, we're right back down to zero. And we go, yeah, and we make assumptions about Jesus and God going, he's disappointed with me today. He doesn't love me. And it's those type of thoughts without heart and relationship that shape and lead us to think that kind of following, one of legalism, one of that if we just follow the rules that we'll be great up in heaven, we'll get a shiny corner office corner, you know. But no, it's not like that. And unfortunately, we just can't just follow the rules. And when it comes to just following Jesus, I'm going to have to be a little more blunt and clear something out of the way that you might have thought this, but I just want to let you know right now. Jesus is not your life coach. In this day and age, we have a problem. I don't think we want a rabbi. We want a life coach. I look like a life coach right now. I look like yes man, like yes, got the microphone. But a life coach is just here to give us tips. A life coach goes, here are 5 steps to improve your life. Try this mindset. You do you. And don't get me wrong, I think life coaches are great, but they're just not Jesus. They give us advice, and then what they do, they step back. They go, cool, figure it out. And having a life coach means trying to optimize your life while we stay in control. We decide which advice to take and which to ignore. But Jesus doesn't offer us tips. In Luke 9:23, he actually says this, if any of you want to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me. A life coach fits into your plans. Jesus replaces your plans. A life coach helps you achieve your goals. Jesus replaces your goals. We often want his blessing without his authority, but Jesus isn't interested in just being a part of your life. He wants to be at the center of it. And he's inviting us not just into transformation, but ultimately into a relationship. And because of this invitation, that's what sets him apart from traditional rabbis. See, typical rabbis waited for the best students to apply, and only the elite of elite were chosen. It's the equivalent of being a 4.0 student. You're applying to Harvard or Yale, and you get waitlisted. It's like getting waitlisted at UNL. You're like, what? Everyone is accepted here. But that's what it was to be an apprentice trying to get a rabbi. But Jesus actually did the opposite. Pastor Aeric kind of stole this a little bit. Instead of apprentices coming to Jesus, Jesus went to them. He didn't wait for people, you know. And he actually, in Matthew 4:19, Jesus actually goes to a group of fishermen and he says this, come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. Or in other translations, be fishers of men. Ordinary, regular, everyday people like you and I, fishermen, tax collectors, just, you know, not anything of a rabbi, scholar. And then follow me, in this case, meant leaving everything behind. And what's crazy is that they did. And this ordinary sentence, just come and follow me, was revolutionary because he chose the unlikely. He chose the unknown. There's a phrase that you might have heard in churches, he qualified the called and not just called the qualify. Ultimately, what that means is he chose the willing. And he offered them belonging before achievement. And I want us to hear this now in this moment. Jesus doesn't need you to earn your place. He calls you as you are. That is what Jesus offers. And there are so many other things that rabbis would offer to their disciples, their apprentices. And if you've ever read the Bible or listened to a sermon at least one time or been at a church for a while, been here at Dwell, we all know that Jesus taught things. Like, it's going back to, I know these things. He taught lessons and stories and parables and sayings. And Jesus and other rabbis at this time also offered this word I want to talk about for a second, yoke. I didn't say yoke. Jesus is not interested in your cholesterol. I said yoke. And some of you might not know what a yoke is, but it was back in the day, it was a farming tool. It was this wooden bar. I have a picture of it up on the screen. See this? Yeah. It was this. And it kind of harnessed 2 animals together. And it was a wooden bar, and it would draft animals, and so that they would be able to pull together. Now, one would not be able to waver. They would have the same exact weight. That is a yoke. So when Jesus and other rabbis offered yoke, it wasn't just a farming tool. He wasn't like, here's my yoke. What do I do with this? But it was a metaphor for a rabbi's specific way of reading scripture and living under God's rule, or again, the law, as I said. And to follow a rabbi was to take on his yoke, which meant to adopt his rhythms, his habit, and his heart. And in this, different rabbis had different yokes. It wasn't just universal. Some were heavy, some were lighter, but Jesus' yoke, it was, I would say, radical. Because Jesus says to this in Matthew 11:28, he says, come to me. This was our opening verse. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at the heart. And you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. So how is this yoke easy? What makes it easy? Because if you ever follow Jesus, it's like, God, you're giving me your toughest battles. No, I just need you to wake up and brush your teeth, or, But Jesus' yoke, it was graced. It had grace, and it wasn't about performance. I just said that the Pharisees' yoke, it was heavy and burdened with rules, but Jesus' yoke was rooted in love and relationship, grace. His yoke didn't remove obedience, but it just refined it. And just as Jesus took external pressure and performance to that internal transformation, he also took our obligation to a love-driven obedience. And some of us, here's the thing, we're carrying yokes all the time, whether you know it or not, that we're never meant to be carried alone. Whether it's the yoke of achievement, the yoke of approval, the yoke of anxiety, the yoke of control, the yoke of comparison. So sure, everyone carries a yoke, but the difference is that we should know this, that Jesus invites us to take his yoke, which leads to life. Life here isn't just a noun describing the state of being, but it's a verb, to live. There's a Matthew McConaughey quote, just keep living, Livin. Life isn't just a state, but we have to do it. We have to live it out with Jesus. And the goal of life with the rabbi always led to reproduction, that the disciples would become like their teacher. And that's how they would live. But Jesus takes us a step further, because he didn't just teach us information, but he imparts identity and mission. He sent us, his disciples, to do what he did. His movement multiplied beyond his physical presence, and unlike other rabbis, his mission wasn't just limited to just a small group. It was for the whole world. And we see this in Jesus' last will and testament, which is called the Great Commission. Some of you might know it. And it reads like this in Matthew 28. Jesus came and told his disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So if we want to follow Jesus, we must know this, that following Jesus means becoming like him and joining his mission. Following Jesus means becoming like him and joining his mission. Who here wants to join his mission? Who here wants to follow Jesus? Well, that's great. You answered the first question. Now the follow-up question to that is, what type of follower do you want to be to Jesus? Jesus in the time had 3 distinct types. You can put them up on the screen. We had the curious crowd, the seeking and the broken, and disciples. Now the curious crowd, we just talked about this last week. They loved Jesus' miracles. They loved the free bread and fish. So would I. I'm hungry. But I actually think if teaching became involved, or if teaching was involved and they accepted it and the teaching got hard, they walked away. I think a lot of times you see people in the Bible, people that interacted with Jesus, that followed Jesus, they were fans and not necessarily followers. All because you follow someone does not mean that you're actually being influenced by them. You might just be a fan. There was the seeking and the broken. That was the second group of people. And they came to Jesus out of a desperate need. They needed something. We talked a little bit about this last week too. They experienced his grace, ultimately his power and miracle of healing. But once they were, let's say, fixed, many of them, and like many of us, I think we stop there. Because once we received from Jesus, I don't think we surrendered to him. So it's easy to receive from Jesus, but sometimes it's not easy to surrender to Jesus. And then lastly, we have the disciples, the fishers of men in Matthew 4, and they left their nets. And these group of people, these 12 disciples, they realized that knowing about Jesus wasn't the same as being with Jesus. They didn't just admire Jesus, the rabbi, but they wanted his dust on their clothes. And then when being under Jesus' yoke, they weren't carrying it alone. He was in the harness with them. He is in the harness with you. If you want to be a disciple, Daniel, you can come up here. The curious crowd, the seeking and the broken, and the disciples. Which one do you want to be? These are some big questions, church. Are you a fan of Jesus, or are you a follower? Are you informed about Jesus, or do you want to be apprenticed by him? Are you carrying the weight of religion, or are you walking in the freedom of the rabbi who fulfilled it all? And so today, I don't want us to just settle for casual Christianity. I don't want to reduce the King of Kings to a weekly podcast or occasional inspiration. I want to follow Jesus, the rabbi. A rabbi unlike any other in the history. A rabbi who was authority and not just quoted authority. A rabbi who calls us the willing and not just called the best. A rabbi who gives a life-giving yoke and not just heavy burdens. And a rabbi who not just taught the law, but ultimately fulfilled it. If you want to not just be transformed by Jesus, but you want to make him your rabbi today, and you go, where do I start? I got 3 steps. We said this earlier in the message. It goes like this. Put them on the screen. Be with Jesus. Become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. You can leave this on the screen. Church, I invite you to stand this morning. As we go back into worship, I think sometimes we get carried away with, well, how do I become like Jesus? How do I do what he did? Let's stop there. I think it's so easy to be Marthas in this world and not enough Marys. Let's just sit at Jesus' feet. Let's just be with him. Let's do the first step together. Let's be with Jesus. Let's make this a time to call on the name that is Jesus. Call him in worship today to be your rabbi. Take on his yoke and let Jesus take you deeper. I want you to follow Jesus to see where he wants to lead you today.